Okay.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining the NASW New York C.A.R.E.S Community Engagement Initiative for ending solitary and ending complicity, a social work dialogue on healthcare, torture, and abolition behind bars, in collaboration with social workers and allies against solitary confinement. My name is Angelique Imani Rodriguez. I'm the manager of membership engagement and special programs here at the NASW New York chapter. Apologies for my camera being off, everyone. My Wi-Fi has been in and out due to the snowstorm, and I want to make sure there's no interference with tonight's program. Some things to look forward to at NASW New York. Capital Action Day in Albany is on February 10th, and we invite you to join us and support chapter advocacy and legislative priorities. Additionally, the NASW New York C.A.R.E.S Annual Social Work Month series will open up very soon, the largest community engagement offering that the chapter holds annually. If you're looking for CEs, we do have a robust schedule planned, and the registration for the first annual NASW New York CE conference being held at Silberman School of Social Work on May 29th will open soon, so stay tuned. And there's so much more on the horizon for the chapter in 2026. Post-event, you'll receive an email that will share most of this information about what's upcoming at the chapter, as well as any resources or information provided by tonight's guests. Thankfully, the presenters have agreed to record this event, so you'll also get access to that recording. Please remember that by registering for any NASW New York events, you agree to abide by the NASW New York anti-harassment policy, of which I will drop the link in the chat for you all shortly. Once again, thank you all for joining us tonight. If you have any questions about this event or any other community engagement events at the NASW New York chapter, I'll drop my email in the chat for you shortly as well. Without further ado, let me introduce you to our host for today, Justina, whenever you're ready.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Thank you so much, Angelique. So as you stated, our presentation today is on ending solitary and ending complicity, a social work dialogue on healthcare, torture, and abolition behind bars. And we really wanted to start this off by discussing what happened last year of December 2024, I'm sorry, when Robert Brooks was murdered inside a prison in New York. This is a picture of him and his son, and then you see a picture of him being assaulted by correction officers. And what really is upsetting is that this was done in a medical office where two nurses were standing by watching this happen as it was happening. Robert Brooks was handcuffed. He was not able to defend himself, and he was brutally murdered. The two nurses that were in that video that worked in that prison continue to have their license and are able to practice as nurses. So we're going to do some introductions. We're also going to speak about what is solitary confinement and what is the impact of solitary confinement on psychological, physical, neurological. And we're also going to hear from Frank De Palma, who is a survivor of solitary confinement. He was in solitary confinement for 22 years, so he will tell us about his firsthand experience. And then we're going to talk about our legislation and as well as like what you can do to get involved. And then we'll also have time for questions. So our learning objectives are that we will identify the psychological, physical harms of solitary confinement, especially like when we're discussing it with people with serious mental illness. We're also going to examine the ethical responsibilities of social workers and health professionals in these kinds of settings, and we'll discuss the Code of Ethics and how that applies to our role. And as I mentioned, we will be going over our bill, and we will be discussing how you can all get involved. So my name is Justina Rosinski. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I'm also the Rikers Island whistleblower, which I will speak more about my experience later on. And I'm also a doctoral candidate at Yeshiva University.
Mhm. And my name is Sandy Burnaby, and I'm a past president of NASW at the New York City chapter about 10 years ago. The story that we just heard about Robert Brooks, as horrible as it is, we like to believe that it's like an anomaly, like it's something that just happens every once in a while. But unfortunately, that's not true. It is clearly a violation of the human rights. And I just want to tell you specifically have this little book, Declaration of Human Rights, and it's Article 5. No one shall be subjected to torture or to cruel, inhumane, or degrading treatment or punishment. And yet we see this every single day, right? We see it in our practice, we see it in our culture, you know, and the question is like, how is it that this happens and that we allow it to happen and so many people just turn away? And we're here to say we can't turn away anymore. When I was practicing, and all of us can admit that practicing social work is like practicing whack-a-mole. This problem, this problem, this problem, this problem, this problem, this problem, this problem. You know, back in 1995, I did an Undoing Racism workshop. I had already been in practice for 20 years. And it wasn't until I did that workshop that I had that aha moment, that I had some clarity why we're playing whack-a-mole, and most importantly, why the majority of the people in our practice, in our social service agencies who receive services are predominantly BIPOC and Black. And in that workshop was the first time that I had clarity, like a whole analysis, that we're a race-constructed society, that when they came here, those men and women brought all of their Eurocentric uh, English institutions here and replicated them all here. And in every single institution, that Eurocentric white bias is embedded. And what we have seen over the years is that Black and brown people, and particularly indigenous peoples, have the worst outcomes in all of the institutions, bar none. Every single institution, all the institutions where we work. And so we were taught, you know, that racism destroys humanity and undoing racism restores humanity. And in fact, we are a human rights profession. Our code of ethics is embedded in human rights. And the question is like, you know, how do we do this work? How do we do the work of undoing racism in these institutions, you know? But the first thing was to understand that we have all internalized it. BIPOC, white, it doesn't matter. All of us have internalized that systems work for so many people. And if it doesn't work for you, what's up with you? What did you do? You know, why did you resist? Why are you wearing those clothing? You know, all of those internalized blaming messages really prevent us from doing the internal work that we need to do to say what is happening to us working in these institutions, that we too participate in that. First thing, whenever you ask anybody, why are people in solitary, they're always, I mean, we're going to get into that. You ask anybody, like, you know, why are the jails, you know, predominantly Black and brown? Why did this happen to Robert Brooks? They always say that that person did something. They must have done something. So we have all institutions deliver terrible outcomes or disproportionately negative impact to BIPOC communities, you know, bar none. So the question is, you know, is there something wrong with the people or is there something wrong with the institutions? So we understand that there's something wrong with the institutions, every single one of them. And so we have to learn how to do things differently if we want different outcomes. So,
Thank you, Cindy.
hmm,
No, I said thank you.
okay. The reason why I joined Social Workers and Allies Against Solitary Confinement is because it's a national network of humanity, people who are deeply in touch with their humanity and understand that we don't have to have a code of ethics to tell us what's wrong is wrong. And I want to encourage each and every one of you to think about joining this movement because we really need to make sure that the people who are on the inside are really focused on human rights, and the people on the outside who see that human rights violations are happening are working to make sure that people's dignity is maintained. So I want to turn it over to Mary Buser. She is the co-founder of Social Workers and Allies Against Solitary Confinement.
Thank you, Sandy. My name, as Sandy just said, is Mary Buser, and I'm the co-director of Social Workers and Allies. And my work is driven by my prior work on Rikers Island, where I was an assistant chief of mental health in the solitary confinement unit. I'm also an author, having written the book Lockdown on Rikers. And I also wrote another book with Frank De Palma, who is right now having a lot of technical issues about his 22 years in solitary. So I'm just going to take the liberty of introducing Frank, and hopefully we're going to get him back on soon. Frank, oh, here he is. Can you introduce yourself, Frank?
Hi, my name's Frank De Palma. I'm 69 years old. I spent 43 years in the Nevada prison system. Over 22 of those years was in solitary confinement. And my goal is to abolish, criminalize solitary confinement. And that's what it's about.
Okay. Thank you, Frank.
Nicole?
My name's Nicole Capizzello. I'm a social worker. I used to be based in Western New York, and now I'm in Vermont. Along with Mary, I'm the co-director of Social Workers and Allies Against Solitary Confinement, and I'm also the leader of our legislative effort, which I will tell you a little bit more about later tonight.
Thank you.
And I'll turn it back over to Mary, but happy to be here.
Great. So first of all, we're going to tell you a little bit about our organization, and it's very long, so we've shortened it to the acronym S.W.A.S.C. And we were actually founded in 2014, so we are almost 12 years old. And our founder was an 80-year-old woman, Moya Atkinson. Believe it or not, 80 years old, heard about solitary confinement, was appalled, and equally appalled to learn about social workers participating in it. And so she set out to round up, so to speak, like-minded people, form this organization. And sadly, she passed away in June, but her work lives on. So our focus is on support, education, and advocacy. We support people who have survived solitary confinement. We have an advisory board of directly impacted individuals. Education. I want to add, we also support social workers, healthcare professionals who have been impacted in some way as well in terms of the secondary trauma. Education. We offer several webinars on solitary, on the ethics of working in solitary, and we have presented at many different venues. And I might mention at the end of this, you will see our upcoming webinar in March, and we'd love it if you would register and attend. It would be very interesting, 2 hours long. And then advocacy. This translates to our legislation. We feel that if our bill was in place, the Robert Brooks tragedy might not have happened. Nicole is going to be telling us a lot more about it, but we're very excited about this legislation, and we believe that it can make a real difference in terms of changing the culture inside jails and prisons. So let's get to it. Solitary confinement. What is it? It's the practice of isolating people in closed cells for 22 to 24 hours a day without meaningful human contact for periods of days, months, years, and in the case of Frank, decades. So I'd like to just ask right here, all of you, if maybe you could put in the chat, why do you think someone would be placed in solitary confinement? Any thoughts? Punitive, yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Wow. For me, calling
Yeah.
clarity, confidence, confinement, it means that is like people that can help each other, like in a confidence. People shouldn't know what they're doing behind.
Okay. All right. Well, what I would say is that the first thing I'd like to clarify is solitary confinement has nothing to do with your outside charges. It is easier than having the skills and taking the time to work. Absolutely. Absolutely, Tanya. You got that right. You nailed it. We'll get to that. Offended or disliked by guards. Yes. Yes, absolutely. You guys are already have a violent inmate. Yes. Um, okay. Yeah, control, absolutely. Control, absolutely. Um, yes. So, punishment for not following prison rules. Yep. Um, you guys have a good feel for this. So this is often considered retaliation. Yes. Oh, yes. All right. If we could just move to the next slide.
Yes.
It is referred to often as the jail within jail. So it has very much to do with what transpires within the jail or the prison. And it's primarily used for punitive reasons. And contrary to what kind of the bill of goods that the public is sold, about it being for the worst of the worst and the Hannibal Lecters of the prisons. My big surprise when I worked in this unit on Rikers Island was how many people were put in there for simple rule breaking, nothing to do with anything terrible. And what also surprised me was the level of suffering inside these cells and the length of time that someone can be placed in there. Typically, correlates to the severity of the infraction. Now, it's very important to note that in 2011, the United Nations took the stance that solitary confinement beyond 15, a mere 15 days, constitutes torture. And we're not going to get into it in this presentation, but I would like to add that there are humane alternatives, that this is not necessary. Yet, despite what the United Nations says, in the United States, in 2025, an estimated 122,000 people are in solitary confinement across the United States. So with that, yes, thank you, Tanya. With that understanding of kind of a baseline about solitary, we're going to turn it over to Frank De Palma, who, as you can see, spent 22 years in solitary and also co-wrote this book. So, Frank, would you like to speak a little bit about your experience in solitary and your thoughts on this? You'd have to come off mute. Yeah. Oh, dear. You're still on mute. Angelique, are you able to take him off mute?
I should be off mute.
Okay. Yeah, there you go. Great, Frank. Thank you.
All right. In 1992, I was placed into solitary confinement along with 13 others as a precaution to violence. You had a lot of young gangbangers. It was convenience. And in solitary confinement, I mean, mine was extreme. I had absolutely no property. And if you don't have money to buy a TV and stuff like that, then you just don't have it. And so I was in extreme solitary. As the years passed, I just began to live in a fantasy world to try to somehow sate my loneliness. That feeling of being alone it just becomes unbearable. It's like a crushing weight. and and the mental health staff, you know, it was just they were getting a paycheck. They didn't really do anything, and they really couldn't because you had the guards to contend with, and they all live in the same town. And if you cause them problems, your car might catch on fire, your tires might get slashed, you know. And so they were afraid. And so they just go along with the program. Uh, you know, their passion for getting into that line of work in the first place, it's all gone. You know, it's gone. And so I never spoke with any of them. And then as time went on, my fantasies, it was unrequited love. And so I stopped fantasizing. And that might have, I don't know. I know guys that have lost themselves in fantasy worlds and they sewed themselves into it forever. They broke free from this world like I did. It just got to be too much after I was hearing those voices screaming and I realized it was in my head. And I became one of those people banging my head against the wall till I cracked my head over something. Sometimes I'd knock myself out. Wake up, blood running down my head. And finally, I just said, no more, no more. And I just broke free from this reality that we're all born to. And I went to a place where nothing is what it was, a place of emptiness and nothingness. And that's where I existed for however, from 2000, I think 2000, I can't remember. It was like 6 or 7 years, I had no memory towards the end. But then I started to come back. And that was an experience, you know. I guess you could say it was my God moment. And I just started coming back more and more. And then the unexpected happened. They found out I was getting out of prison. And they all went into panic mode. And then Bert Jackson, who was the doctor of psychology, he went and told him, you're gonna do something with him now, because if you let him out now, he's gonna be on world news before the week is out. He's gonna be dead, or other people are gonna be dead. And I'm gonna tell him who's to blame. He didn't last too much longer from what I heard. He was relieved of his position. But I was shipped out to NNCC, where I had developed a severe case of agoraphobia. I never came out of that cell, ever. And until then there's Miss Walsh and others that worked with me to where I could be around people again. I was their first test case. And so it was just, shooting their best shot, And but Miss Walsh, she was my guiding light, so to speak. I didn't want to disappoint her. So I made it all work, Yeah. And then in 2018, December 21st, I was released from prison. And it's been, but going back to like this bill you guys are all trying to get passed, that'll be a good thing as long as it's made aware to all the prisoners within the prison systems that this is now a law. So therefore, if Joe Blow gets taken up to the infirmary and he's been beaten up really bad, and it was the guards, but he doesn't say it, unless it's known by the prisoners, he's going to have a rat jacket. And something bad can happen to him. So that's going to be an important factor that's going to have to be done to let, make sure, like they have prison newsletters that they law reviews and things. And there's always a way to where it can be posted to where inmates can read it on a bulletin, in a memo, where it can be posted for everybody to see. So that takes the heat off the prisoner, But yeah, I could never, even though I had no use for him, I can never blame the mental health staff or medical staff for turning a blind eye and not reporting things because, they had to make a choice, their family or us. And of course, they're going to choose their family, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and because the threat is real, that green wall of silence is real,
Yeah. Yeah.
So it'll be a good thing if that bill gets passed and is made law. It could be a template for all prisons. It needs to be.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you very much. Yeah. Frank really did go through it, and after 22 years was taken out of the cell to be prepared for release. And he's been out 7 years now, and they predicted he wouldn't make it a week. And this is his mission, to abolish solitary. Yeah. Thank you for all the things that people are saying to Frank. Very appreciated. So the impacts of solitary, and if Frank wasn't impactful enough, this picture is worth 1,000 words. So we're just going to talk about that a little bit, about what this person is enduring. And
that's what someone told me. They said they would see me laying in a fetal position a lot, curled up like a fetal position.
Yeah.
Or laying or sitting in bed, rocking back and forth. They told me that's self-soothing.
Yeah, during those 6 years when Frank was pretty much catatonic. Yeah. So obviously the worst impact of solitary confinement is psychological. And for anyone who suffered from depression, to induce it is really a crime. And you're looking at depression, hopelessness, anxiety, psychosis, hallucinations. That's what Frank experienced. No prior psychiatric history. This was all hearing the voices, and so much paranoia all came about after years in solitary. Paranoia, another one that Frank experienced and can speak to all of this. Self-mutilation, suicide, and this is very important. Only 7%, I mean, it's a huge number, but 7% of the entire prison population is in solitary confinement. And yet 50% of all suicides behind bars take place in solitary confinement, which is very telling. And then we also have physical impacts for older people with heart conditions, diabetes. You have a recommended protocol of exercise. Good luck. There's nothing you can't. Vitamin D deficiency, and we're learning more and more about the importance of vitamin D. Well, that comes from sunshine, and you can bet that they are not dispensing vitamin D supplements to people in solitary. So without vitamin D, you've got all kinds of you're at risk for so many things: bone breaks, fractures, just so many things. Every day they come out with more and more about vitamin D deficiencies. Also affects your vision, because your long distance vision is never used. You can't look far away if you're in a cell with no windows for years, and it takes a toll. That's not normal. We have a range with our eyes. So oddly enough, vision problems become an issue. And then for people, sensory deprivation, isolation devastates the brain. And it's worth it to take a moment just to read this, because it's so, I think, really profound. There is no question about it. Without air, we will live minutes. Without water, we will live days. Without nutrition, we will live weeks. Without physical activity, our lives are decreased by years. Social interaction is part of these basic elements of life. And again, neurological, more and more studies are popping up every day. MRIs are showing, it's not normal. MRIs showing changes in the brain. They are now being able to quantify all of this damage. And the need for social connection, it never goes away. In solitary units, people continue always to have the need to connect with other people. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Justina.
Thank you, Mary. So now we're going to talk about our code of ethics and social workers working in solitary confinement. So I started working on Rikers Island of December 2023 to September 2024. And when I went into Rikers Island, I thought there was no solitary confinement because of what happened to Khalif Browder. And I read Mary's book years ago, so I really thought like I wasn't going to see what I saw. But quickly, I did see that the officers in the mental health units were locking people in their cells for weeks and even months. And this was called deadlocking. So a lot of times, like Mary spoke about, they'll say there is no solitary confinement, but they'll use other terms for it. And this is where I really was very troubled by what I was witnessing and conflicted because I always remembered my code of ethics, which is social workers' primary responsibility to promote the well-being of clients. And social workers respect the inherent dignity and worth of the person. So while working there, like I saw how my code of ethics were being violated working in that kind of environment, and there was really nothing that I could do. There was no one to report this to. There was no one to really like talk to about it. I mean, of course, I spoke to supervisors about it, but there was just no one to report it to. And I couldn't believe that because I took the mandated training course, and before working on Rikers, I would have to call the Justice Center sometimes if I found out my client was being abused. So I just couldn't believe that there was just no one to call to report it. And that's why I was so conflicted with working there, seeing what I was seeing and just not being able to do anything about it. So, like I said, there is this ethical dilemma. The social work code of ethics calls for respecting the dignity of people, and where people are automatically stripped of all dignity, the social worker immediately faces ethical dilemma. You also get desensitized. So, social workers are inherently caring people, but we are also human. And faced with human misery and suffering on a daily basis, and in an attempt to cope, a hardening over is almost inevitable, diminishing the quality of care, chipping away at the social worker's core values. And while I was working there only for 9 months, it did really impact my mental health because I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. And I would go home and just think about it. And, they say, leave your job at your job, but like, how could you? How could you just go home and act like everything's okay when you've seen people locked in their cells for weeks and months? So what I did was I decided to look for another job and I resigned. And when I resigned, I testified before the Board of Corrections. And there was a daily news article that came out because I felt a lot of guilt leaving. I loved working with my patients on the unit and I really felt like I was abandoning them. But I promised myself that like when I leave, I am going to say something about this and I'm going to try to like stop this because I can't just like look away and pretend this was not happening. So I testified. And like I said, there was a daily news articles and many more articles. And that's really how I actually met Mary and Nicole and Frank because they heard about my story. And like I said, I read Mary's book when it first came out, and Mary was like my idol, someone that like I really admired because she was an LCSW just like me, and I watched her in the Khalif Browder documentary. So Mary retweeted the story, and we started talking, and now we're working together, and we're good friends, and we're working to get this bill passed. So it's just amazing what happened, but. Yeah, I was very conflicted and I did think about just walking away and not saying anything, but I couldn't forget what I witnessed. And we're going to talk more about the bill um, right now, but I really do believe that like if this bill was in place, then I would probably still be working on Rikers, working with my clients and helping them from within because I would be able to report what I'm seeing and I would feel like I am abiding by my code of ethics and I can do my job. So now we're going to turn to Nicole and she will tell us more about this bill. Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay. All right. Thank you, Justina. So, as Mary talked about earlier, our work at Social Workers and Allies Against Solitary Confinement has a few different facets, and one of them has been supporting this legislation in New York State, which people have alluded to at this point, and Frank talked a little bit about that it right now is a state bill, but we're hoping could be used as a template in other places. And the name of it, which is very long and we did not choose, is called End Health Professionals' Complicity in the Torture of Detained or Incarcerated Individuals Act. Our sponsors in the New York Senate are Julia Salazar, and then over in the Assembly is Anna Kellis, and they're both really wonderful, powerful advocates. We're really lucky to have them. And I'm just going to tell you a little bit about how this bill came about and then what we're doing right now, and we'll be happy to tell you more about why we think it's necessary. So as Mary and Justina mentioned already, we want to think that solitary confinement is no longer happening, that mistreatment is not happening behind bars, and that is just simply not the case. As we saw with Robert Brooks over a year ago now, not only is this happening, but it's probably happening a lot more than we think. Not everyone loses their life, but many, many people are hurt by mistreatment behind bars. And as Justina also mentioned, you have people, including healthcare professionals, standing by, right? So this bill came about, and this bill hopes to change that, but it has a kind of long history. It came about in 2003, and that was in response to what medical professionals saw happening at CIA black sites, so places like Guantanamo. We have colleagues in New York State who are human rights advocates, doctors, psychologists who said, who's certifying these people? Like, how are they allowed to do this, right? Because you have healthcare professionals at that time in Guantanamo who were not helping and in fact sometimes hurting. So this bill came about 20 years ago in response to that. And then we got involved in 2021, and we got involved after the Halt Solitary Confinement Act was passed because we'd worked on legislation around that and thought, well, what can we do as social workers to really help uphold the HALT bill and make sure that it's implemented properly and prevent further abuse. So including solitary confinement, but other forms of abuse as well. So I'll talk a little bit more about that if you want to go to the next page, Justina. Right, so we're a group made up of social workers. That's the heart of the group, I would say. So Justina, Mary, Sandy, and I are all active members of this group. I joke that you have to die to get off of the group because we've been meeting pretty much every Friday for 5 years now. So 5 years of advocating for this bill. We have a really wonderful team, like a core team of about 10 people. So social workers like ourselves, as well as a doctor, psychologists. We have lawyers in the group. And then, of course, very importantly, directly impacted people who have who are on the outside now, but would have greatly benefited if a bill like this had been in place. We also have former MSW student, which is really wonderful, that joined our ranks after moving on from her internship, and other human rights activists like myself. You can go to the next slide. Okay, so what this bill would do, as I mentioned, it would strengthen the Halt Solitary Confinement Act. And then very importantly, as we talked about, it provides recourse for people like Mary, like Justina, to not participate in mistreatment and torture. So as they can talk about much better than I can, a big frustration for both of them during their jobs on Rikers Island was that there wasn't really anything they could do, which is why both of them ultimately left and are here tonight as advocates and not as current Rikers Island employees, right? So This bill would change that. There would be a reporting mechanism, and it would require that anyone report. It would also ensure the privacy of incarcerated people when they're speaking to healthcare staff. So that's really important as well, because right now, oftentimes, privacy and confidentiality are a joke behind bars, and people really aren't given that, even though they should be. And it protects against retaliation, really importantly, because a lot of times when someone is a whistleblower, they're putting themselves at great risk. And we would like for that to, not be the case. So next one. Okay. Oh, here, you can just kind of click through this one. I did it dramatically and forgot about it. Okay, great. So why this bill is important. I think the people here have really demonstrated that well, and we can talk a little bit more about it in a bit. But as I already talked about, accounts of mistreatment are still very common. We've especially seen this in last year since the Wildcat strike and since the very tragic deaths of Robert Brooks and Messiah Natwi. Societal costs are very high from this. It costs a lot of money to incarcerate someone, and it costs a lot of money to incarcerate someone in solitary confinement. And it also costs a lot of money to have lawsuits against the Department, the Department of Corrections, as is pretty common. In addition, you have just unquantifiable individual suffering. So 94% of people that are currently incarcerated will be released, and we want them to be released as better versions of themselves, not people harmed by the system. And this is a very extreme example of how people are harmed by this system. And that violence has a toxic effect on everyone who's working within this environment. So that includes social workers, psychologists, nurses, occupational therapists, all the people that are very important presences behind bars are affected by this. And it also includes the correctional staff. So a big part of this too is having people working corrections understand that there are alternatives. Then very importantly, it protects the well-being and inherent dignity of people who are incarcerated. And finally, as we've talked a lot about tonight, it removes this central ethical tension. So as Justina mentioned, our social work code of ethics, and each profession has its own code of ethics, which currently is superseded by the this incredibly broken and harmful system. And there's several things you can do, and I'm going to turn it back to Sandy, who's going to talk about those a bit.
Okay. Of course, we're going to ask you to take some action. First, I want to thank NASW because they did write a letter of support for this legislation. But we need a lot of support, okay? Because in order to get this on the floor, we need sponsors. And we'll get to that in a minute. But there is a petition that we signed, that we established with the National Commission on Correctional Health Care. They talk about all kinds of ways in which you can bring health care to people who are incarcerated, but they have not taken a stand to end solitary. And so we have a petition asking them to be on the side of ending this torture, not just taking care of people who have been tortured or who are being tortured. So that's what that petition is about. Where is that? That's the third one down here in the chat. Please sign that. We need for you, each one of you, there is a link there for you to find who your assembly member is and who your senator is in New York State. Call them, please, and leave a message that we need you to sponsor this bill. And the bill is in there. Everything is in the chat. Please do not leave without checking out our chat. And I'm going to ask you something. You heard something tonight that was new, that you hadn't thought of. Don't turn away. Teach somebody something. Share something. Each one teach one. We have videos on our website. We have whole presentations. This is a presentation. Show it to your kids. Show it to your parents. Show it to your neighbors. Take it to church, synagogue, whatever. Do not turn away. We need humanity on the inside, your humanity on the inside. So each one teach one. And mostly, on the third Monday of every month at 7 o'clock, there is a national network that meets for an hour. These are the most amazing human beings. I mean, just think about that. Who's doing this? Most of us have never been in a solitary cell. Many of us haven't even worked in a prison. I haven't. But when you understand what's going on, how do we turn away? So before we end, I just want you all to promise me that you'll sign the petition, you'll call your assembly person, you'll call your senator, tell them to sponsor this bill. I want to thank NASW for bringing us together and for also sending us a letter of support. And also, if you belong to an organization, if you know somebody who's a nursing organization or even, I don't know, whatever organization, get letters of support. Help us. This is not going to happen without everybody, contributing something. So what else do we have here? With all of these remarks, I think we should open it up now for questions. What do you think? Are we
Yes,
ready for
and
that?
maybe just we can briefly talk.
Oh,
We do
yeah.
have an upcoming webinar.
Yes, we
Um,
have an upcoming webinar on Wednesday night, March 25th. It's on Straight Talk about solitary confinement and race. Angela Hattery and Earl Smith wrote a book, Way Down in the Hole. And Marvin Wade, who is also impacted, will be the presenters. The first 10 people who register will get a copy of their book. It's a fascinating, but more than fascinating, it is essential that we understand the role that race plays. When you walk into Rikers, who's there? When you walk into Sing Sing, who's there? Black people get punished for what white people do and get away with. And that is just the way it happens. So please join us. You get 2 CEs, and we're applying now for NASW approval, but through New York State, we have ways of giving you 2 CEs. So please register, join us, and let's have a discussion.
yes, and also Sandy and I and Marvin will be at the NASW conference in New York on May 29th, and we are doing an in-person presentation about our work and this bill. So definitely check us out there.
Thank
But
you.
please
Bye.
email us if you need any information. Like we have our website, our email. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, on Instagram, because we really need everyone involved.
So we
Because
have a couple of questions in the chat.
Sure.
One from Netter Thomas. Please discuss what has happened to a bill that has already been passed, S.6422 in 2008. Thank you.
What is that one?
I responded in the chat. I really have no idea about that bill at all. I would assume that it was not very strong or sufficient because other solitary confinement legislation was introduced in 2012 that was ultimately passed in 2021. So I'm just unfortunately have not been involved in this long enough to be familiar with that specific piece of legislation. Mary, do you remember? Were you paying attention to this kind of thing then?
I'm not familiar with it, no.
Can we go into gallery view?
So Justine would have to
Oh,
stop sharing.
stop sharing. Okay.
Yeah, so that we can have a discussion.
Okay. Another question is from Gail. What protections would be in place for reporters / incarcerated when reporting abuse? What department receives the report or complaint?
Nicole, do you want to speak about that?
Great question. So it took us a while to figure out what organization would be best to handle the complaints. And we ultimately decided on the Inspector General's office. And there's some pluses and minuses for each office, but that was who our sponsors and their offices thought would be able to make the most impact. Of course, reporting within the prison system wouldn't make sense because you're then monitoring and reporting to yourself, right? So it's important that people have somewhere, an outside agency to go to.
Just like if you work in an outpatient program, like you are reporting to the Justice Center, which is an outside agency, and they come in and investigate. And I think what's important is that, like Frank was saying in the beginning, like this would be law. So, like every prison would have to abide by this law, and the correction officers would know that this would be law. So, they would know that they can't take someone into a medical office and assault them because it will be reported because that is the law.
Right.
Or do it in front of like nurses or social workers because they will know the nurses or social workers or other healthcare professionals will have to report this.
And they have to investigate, mandatory investigation.
So just like, when we suspect or we have proof of child abuse and we have to contact ACS, this would be the same thing where we would be reporting it and there would be an investigation.
Look, we understand that this is not the answer, but we have to begin to put structures in place because it's going to take a long time to change the culture of prisons, right, and jails. So this is a mechanism, and we'll continue to work with others to add other pieces. Preventative reform.
And it will also protect the people that work there because just like I said, I had to leave, Mary had to leave, and I truly believe that if this bill was in place, like I would probably still be working there because I would have made a report and then I would have felt okay that like I did my job and I actually reported this. I wouldn't feel so conflicted.
And Robert Brooks says if this bill is in place, I think my father would be
Yeah,
alive
his son,
today,
Robert Brooks Jr., he's part of our
right?
coalition and he wrote a memo and he stated that he really believes if this bill was in place, his dad would still be alive because someone would intervene. These nurses wouldn't just be standing by watching this happen.
Right. And the only reason why we know this happened is because the videotape was running. Obviously, they didn't know that, but and they look
Yeah.
like they were casual. They look like just another day in
Yeah, this happens, on a regular basis, and Frank has said it himself and other people part of our coalition that when they saw the video, like they were not surprised. They were just surprised that it actually got out because this is something that they would see on a daily basis while incarcerated. And by watching the video, you can see that it was just another day.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Somebody said we have to start somewhere. Yes, we have to start. We can't turn away. We can't be enablers. We are agents of change. And when we don't take that action, we become enablers. Unacceptable. Yes, they're
Yeah, Ellen, yes. And when I was working on Rikers, I knew there was no way I could speak out by working there. And that's why I had to like resign because that I just knew like it wasn't going to be possible to like speak out and still work there.
No.
this bill is to protect the person who is reporting, to support, to empower, to protect. You're not alone. You're mandated, and we have whistleblower protection. Difficult to say. How will we protect? It's a whole nother story because you can't have retaliation because it's exposed. Somebody's going to come and somebody's going to record it and somebody's going to investigate.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Thank
Tonya.
you. Any other questions before we finish up or any other thoughts?
You know,
When is this bill going to be put up before? When is it
we
going to
need the
be?
sponsors, Frank. We need these sponsor letters. That's why this team here can help get sponsors. The Assembly and the Senate, we have to get it on the floor, and it won't go on the floor if we can't get sponsors.
Yeah, so our coalition have been meeting weekly, few times per week with different senators and assembly members, but we also need all of you to call. And we have the links of how you can check who your senator is and who your assembly person is. And
Mhm,
like you need to call them and let them know you are a constituent and you support this bill and this bill needs to get passed. So
mhm,
then it can go on the floor and can be
mhm,
voted on.
mhm.
Yeah.
I just want to mention something.
Somebody has
Tanya,
their hand
Yeah,
up
I'm
too.
sorry. Yeah,
I
yeah.
have my hands up and I put my question on the chair if you can read it. Otherwise, I can say it.
You were
Okay.
asking if the slides would be shared?
Yeah.
Yes. Nicole is going to email the slides for me. She agreed, and they'll be sent all of the information, including the links that were dropped in the chat. Anything that was shared by the group today will be sent in that post-event email by no later than tomorrow. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Can I just say one thing?
Absolutely.
Tanya Krupak is a social work warrior. She's been chatting in here, acknowledging us like crazy. She's a social work warrior. Yeah. And she is like a powerhouse around women in prison and justice for women in prison. So I was just like honored that she's here tonight.
Yes, thank you, Tanya.
Well, right back at you. Thank you so much. That was very unnecessary, but I'm in the company of warriors and you guys far surpass me. Thank you. I admire all of you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanya. I mean, I've known you for, I don't know about your work for 30 years. It's
Been
crazy.
around the block a little, yeah.
Yeah. It's so wonderful to see you here, or know that you're here. There you are.
Ellen, the petition, the link to the petition, and all of the links shared this evening will be shared in that post-event email as well. Okay. We have a couple of more minutes if anyone has any last-minute items they want to share, any questions for our group.
This mayor, Mondami,
Yeah.
how do you think he would feel about getting on board?
He's a sponsor of our bill.
Yeah.
So when he was in the assembly, he was a sponsor of the bill. And now that he's a mayor, he has been working to make sure that solitary confinement has been implemented, properly.
Yes.
What's the word I'm looking for?
Implemented, because on Rikers, Mayor Adams would sign an emergency executive order every 5 days that would like prohibit from the solitary confinement law to be put in place. And Mamdani earlier this month gave DOC 45 days to come up with a plan of how to implement the law.
Right.
They need to get a hold of the people in Colorado.
Yes. Anyway.
So thank you, everyone. And I hope, this inspires you all to really get involved and we can really make some change in the lives of our patients, our clients, and also for ourselves.
And the human rights of this whole country.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, NASW.
Thank you. I'm going to stop the recording. Thank you all, everyone. Have a great evening.
Thank you. Good night.